Hello and welcome to Movie Night Tonight. This is the movie discussion podcast where every week we watch a new film and discuss it in depth, with each month having a new theme. We are currently in the month of May, which is our month of survival movies, and the film we are discussing tonight is 2011's The Grey. I am your host, Nathanael Molnár. I'm joined by Rob Giachinta. Rob, thanks for being here with me.
No problem.
Before we get into the discussion, and this is a full, open, spoiler discussion, we are talking about this film as if you watched it with us. Rob, I want to know, what are your first impressions and roughly how many times you've seen The Grey?
This was the first time I had seen it, and I thought it was a pretty good movie. I mean, I wasn't blown away or anything. It wasn't anything really surprising to me, but I thought it was really well acted and really well shot. And, for a movie to watch at home during, quarantine, I thought it really did the trick. And it was definitely, if I saw it at like a $5 Blu-ray bin, I'd definitely pick it up, put it in my collection.
Nice. So this is probably my second or third time seeing this movie. And I really like this movie a lot. I agree with everything you're saying. I think the acting is fantastic from everybody, especially Liam Neeson. And I really like Frank Grillo in this movie.
Me too.
The direction by Joe Carnahan, I think, is fantastic. And what I really like about it is the blending of like the real location that they filmed in with the CGI to really kind of give it this really real visceral feeling to it. Like, it doesn't feel like they're just in front of a bunch of green screens. It feels tangible, it feels real, and I really like that about this movie. So the last movie that we talked about last week for our first installment in this month of survival movies was Castaway. And so while I was watching this movie, I kept thinking about, like, how did it compare to Castaway in terms of these things that we've talked about with survival movies. We talked a lot last week when we sort of defined the genre of film that survival movies were a lot about isolation, which was something you were mentioning about the person is isolated, they're on their own, and it's sort of a battle against the elements. It's a battle against nature. It's bringing people back to their sort of primitive, more ancestral roots of the hunters and gatherers, the people who didn't rely on modernization and technology the same way we do today. And so with The Grey, we have a very kind of interesting contrast to what we saw with Castaway. And I'm curious what you thought about this. So with Castaway and The Grey, you almost have like complete opposites in terms of the locations of where the people are stranded. Castaway, after watching The Grey, Castaway looks like a fun Florida retreat. He's stranded on this tropical island where he has coconuts and all these like vast resources, whereas in The Grey, they're stuck in the Alaskan wilderness with nothing to do, nothing to...
Well, they did have stuff to make fires, at least.
Yeah, that's true. It took they figured out how to make a fire a lot quicker.
I still would rather be in the sun.
Yeah, I've always been a person who, if you give me the option of cold or hot, I'll take cold any day. Between these two movies, I would rather be in the Castaway position than in The Grey. Maybe it's because of the wolves, but...
Castaway, there was like no wildlife. So that was like the one part of that movie that I'm always like, well, I don't understand how like he never encountered really any wildlife besides the whale or whatever, or like crabs or stuff like that.
Yeah. Now I want the cut scene from Castaway World, the whales hunt him.
Or like, I don't know, I was expecting like snakes or like maybe a monkey or something to come at, like something, but...
We could have used a couple monkeys. So we have this contrast in terms of the environments. So I'm curious, what do you think this says about the characters, in that how much their survival going on in this? Because, you have Chuck Nolan's fight for survival all the way until the very end of Castaway, when, spoilers, but we talked about it last week, he gets off of the island.
And the trailer.
And the trailer. And then in this, I mean, it's left a little bit ambiguous as to whether or not Liam Neeson's character survives. With both films, how much of this do you think it's based upon the characters and what they have within them that allows them to be able to survive and how much of it is actually the location and the environments in which they're being forced to survive in.
Well, it's interesting when you were talking about how like Castaway's kind of just one man, while this one has a bunch of characters. But when I was watching the movie, I kind of just thought of it as Liam Neeson on his own, almost with extra weight, kind of, because I never thought those other guys really contributed much of anything. I thought he was the only one who really knew what he was doing and was leading the show. And the other guys were kind of just somewhat getting in the way, like Diaz always like causing a problem and stuff like that. I mean, he didn't need them in situations like where they had the rope between the tree and something like that. But for the most part, I kind of thought this was almost like a solo survival kind of movie.
Yeah, it definitely has that element of it because, like you were mentioning, Liam Neeson's character was the only one who really knew what he was doing. So I almost wonder, like, if maybe he would have been more efficient without any of them and he was just completely on his own. But at the same time, I wonder if he would have had as much of a will and a drive to get out of there if he wasn't trying to save other people.
Yeah, that's true as well, because as we see in the beginning of the movie, he almost attempts suicide. So, yeah, that's a good point, too.
And by the end of the film, I mean, we have, throughout the whole movie, we had the flashbacks with presumably his wife in bed. And then at the very end, we realized that she had passed away. Mm-hmm. And so that was another interesting contrast between Castaway and The Grey, was that with Castaway, Chuck Nolan the whole time, the reason that he's fighting, his sort of means for survival, that drive that's within him, his whole purpose for surviving to get off of that island was so that he can get back to Kelly and see her again. He has a life, he has something waiting for him off of the island, and that is what drives him to get off of there. With The Grey, by the end of the film, we realize that for Liam Neeson's character, he doesn't have that. He has nothing waiting for him. And you almost see that with Diaz as well, who he kind of says before he dies, he says, what do I have waiting for me? Why should I keep fighting to survive? There's nothing waiting for me. There's nothing better than this. I should just lay here.
Yep.
With the other people that are with Liam Neeson, the other survivors, they have something waiting for them. They have families, they have kids, they have loved ones. Liam Neeson doesn't have that, and yet he still tries to survive. And so it's interesting to look at that kind of difference and see. So if Liam Neeson doesn't have something to go back to, why is he fighting so hard to survive? I think part of it also kind of ties in with this idea that the movie has throughout a couple of points. It kind of makes references to this concept of how sort of linked the wolves and the humans are. That there isn't too much difference between that. They're both animals. And so you almost have throughout this, you have like to use references to other animals, you have a cat and mouse game between the wolves and the humans, that they're both trying to survive. And the thing with the wolves is that, they're not necessarily like, I mean, they're murderous in that they're killing people, but they're doing so to protect their territory. As Liam Neeson's character says, we're invaders. We're not supposed to be here. And now we're threatening them and their survivalhood. And so it becomes an us or them from the wolves' perspective, but it's also an us or them from the humans' perspective. And so it's sort of this duel between the two of them. But what the film kind of gets into, I think, is this concept that what is actually driving them is more of like an instinctual thing. With the wolves, it's very much they're trying to protect their territory. It's more instinct. They're animals and they have that sort of animal drive. And with the humans, the film kind of begs this question of what is separating the humans from the animals? What is that sort of quality that separates them, that makes humans, while humans are an animal, what makes humans a more evolved kind of animal? What makes humans a more distinct animal? And that thing that changes humans, separates them from the wolves, is the capacity for love. That there is something to hold on to, that there is some sort of purpose outside of just your own continued survival. And the film kind of highlights that through these additional supporting characters who have something that they're trying to get back to. But I think that it also hammers that home with Liam Neeson not having that, and that he is almost operating with that sort of wolf mentality of, I have to fight because it's either me or them. It's that instinctual thing. It's fight or flight.
When we're talking about the wolves, I really liked how like it wasn't like CGI wolves or any of this crap. Like they actually like when you have like close-ups of the wolf's face, it's like half like black and you can see half of it. They did a really good job of not just exposing like the monsters or anything like that, if you know what I mean. Like it kind of reminded me of like a Jaws almost.
Yeah. Yeah. The wolves were for the most part CGI, but it goes back to exactly what we were talking about last week when we had our whole discussion of practical effects and CGI and how you kind of have to use a combination of the two for something to really stand the test of time. And that's exactly what they do here with the Grey. They know, I mean, they use the practical reality of filming in these outdoor locations. They filmed in British Columbia where they were shooting in negative 40-degree weather. All the snow and the snowstorms and everything you see, that's all real. That's all stuff they experienced. They didn't use CGI to kind of enhance that at all. And so you have this very tangible, this very real location. And then they shoot. And this goes to Joe Carnahan and his direction and how he chooses to use the wolves. As you were mentioning, he very much does take a Jaws mentality with the wolves. He doesn't just show everything. And even though we as people, as audience members watching this film, we know what a wolf looks like. You know, we understand what wolves are. It would be very easy to just show the wolves in their entirety, and it probably wouldn't have meant that much. But because Joe Carnahan used to shoot them in very deliberate ways, and he used them for a very specific purpose, as you mentioned, sort of a monster figure for this film. If you look at The Grey as a horror movie, they are the monsters in it, even though it's something tangible and real like a wolf. And Joe Carnahan chooses to shoot them in a very specific way that not only preserves the CGI so that it doesn't feel like CGI, but also preserves the stakes and the tension and the suspense that they bring.
It was interesting to look up the budget for this movie, and I was thinking at least like 50 to 60 million. It only cost them 25 million to make this, and I thought that was crazy. Like, see, like you can make movies cheaper and make them still look bigger than they are. I feel like people just don't understand that anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of that is also just the filming on the real locations gives it that very wide feeling to it, that sort of openness and expansiveness that you can't really capture if you're filming this on a soundstage or if you're doing green screen backdrops.
Like that movie Call of the Wild. Like they shouldn't have had some CGI looking dog thing. Like they didn't need that.
CGI looking dog thing. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right on that. But with the Grey, I do really like, because you can be tempted to kind of look at the Grey as sort of, it's kind of a straightforward movie, you know. It's very straightforward in the fact that people crash, they have to survive, they're fending off wolves, they get picked off one by one, and then it ends with this cliffhanger ending. But I do feel like there is more going on beyond the surface of it. And that's one of the things I really appreciate this film, because it has the action, it has the thrills, it has the suspense, and I'm completely invested in this movie every time I'm watching it. But there's also just a little bit more beyond the surface as to a little bit of commentary about who we are as people and what separates us from the animals that we're fighting for our survival from. And I really appreciate that about this movie.
Yeah, out of all like the, you know, Liam Neeson's kind of like action phase that he's had over the past like 10 years, I'd say this is probably in like the top tier of them.
Yeah. I definitely agree.
Would be up there with like a Taken or some of the other ones he did. I really like Nonstop and Run All Night.
Yeah, Run All Night, that was a really good one. I'd put this above Taken for me.
I'd have to watch Taken again.
I think this movie, it's a very grisly movie. Like, you could have done this in a PG-13, but I think it's incredible. It's more effective as an R. And I think we kind of, as film fans, we kind of have conversations a lot of when things should be PG-13, when should they be rated R, R-rated movies that didn't need to be R, that could have been PG-13, PG-13 that didn't need to be that could have been R. There's this whole kind of like debate about when is it good to kind of go for the blood and the gore and all of that, and when is it better to kind of refrain from that and use more of like a subtle approach. And I think with the Gray, going for that grisly R rating, showing the blood, showing bodies being torn apart, it was so effective because part of the nature of the film is that this is reality. These are people stuck in a real situation, and every single decision that they make could lead to their demise if they don't do things properly and don't make the right decisions. And you have to show exactly what happens to you if you fall behind and you get caught by the wolves. You need to see exactly what happens to you, and I thought that was a very smart decision on their part.
Yeah, it definitely would have detracted from the movie if like they were trying to make it all kiddie.
Yeah, I could see how a studio would kind of
Yeah,
present this movie as, well, we can make this movie, we just don't need to show the blood, we don't need
yeah.
to show the gore, we
And
can just do
think
quick
it
cuts.
helps that the budget was low, that they could, make it rated R. Because I think if like this budget was like $100 million, they would have said we need this PG-13. We got to make our money back. They were willing, and I think I could look it up. I think it made over like $100 million in the
Yeah.
end. So it was a January movie as well.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it originally came out, like, I think it premiered at a festival in December of 2011, and then it had its actual theatrical wide release in January of 2012. Which probably it's smart of them to put it out in like the December, January, because then you get to capitalize on the winter aspect of it.
It ended up making 80, which I'm 25 to 8. That's not bad. It didn't do gangbusters.
They probably broke even,
Yeah.
but didn't make that much money on
I
it.
remember I almost was going to see this at the theater, but it was my mom was with her friend, and she said I could either see The Gray with them or I could see the Chronicle with my brother, and I chose Chronicle, which I don't regret because I think I like Chronicle more. But it was just kind of interesting to think I could have saw this in the movie theater.
Yeah. I feel like this would have been I didn't see this one in theaters either. I feel like this would have been a really intense one to see in theaters. And it's funny you mentioned that because one of the really interesting kind of bits of trivia around this film is that Roger Ebert, the famous critic, he watched this film. He was doing a few screenings in one day, and this was one of the movies he watched. And so he watched The Gray, and then he went into his next screening. And 30 minutes into that film, he had to get up and leave because he was still so emotionally affected by this movie. It was just sticking with him, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was just so much so that he wasn't able to focus on the movie he was watching, that he got up and left and said, it's not fair to that movie if I'm not focusing on that movie. I'll watch it another time so that it has its due. But that's for Joe
Didn't
Carnahan,
even realize he was alive
at the time of
Yeah,
I think I could be completely wrong on this. I think he passed away in 2013.
oh, so yeah.
I'm
It sounds
I
about
could
right
be
because I
wrong.
thought he was already dead at that point, but not.
Yeah. But that's got to be pretty high praise for Joe Carnahan that your movie affected Roger Ebert so much that he couldn't do his job.
I kind of feel bad for that. I mean, I think he's a little underrated, in which like I think he's made some pretty good films, and then he's all I think he's just one of those guys that he might be a little tough to work with, just the way he comes off on Twitter and stuff like that. But I mean, he's made movies like this and another really underrated movie like Narc and Smoking Aces and stuff like that. And I mean, he had a screenwriting credit for Bad Boys, the last one, and like I know he hasn't made a movie in a while, but I'd totally line up to see something else that he did. I know he had the Raid remake, running. I don't know.
With Frank Grillo was supposed to be the star of that.
Yeah, that guy is awesome. I think very underrated.
Yeah.
He's kind of like a John Bernthal kind of actor to me. He's just very kind of like grisly, kind of dark, kind of character actor.
That's a very good comparison, Frank Grillo and John Bernthal. although Frank Grillo gets more screen time.
Yeah, for whatever reason.
But Frank Grillo, I really liked him in this movie.
Yeah.
I thought he did a really good job, and he kind of brought a good balance to the film. And I liked his arc that he had. Because he really, because he obviously wasn't taking it seriously in the beginning, and then he just kind of had a, well, fuck you kind of attitude for a lot of it. And then he really kind of turns around by the end. And I really like when his death scene, or when he lays down ready to die, was one of my favorite parts of the movie. And the reason why was because I was thinking about it as I was watching it. Because he's laying there and he's saying, I'm done. I can't make it any further. I just want to rest. I just want to... you're saying to the other guy that death is like just this it just kind of comes over you and it's warm. I want to have that. I'm done. And you have the other guy with them saying, come on, you've survived this far. You've come this far. And I was thinking about how what's really going on at that moment is that Diaz survived everything that they went through. Everything from jumping to the trees, from escaping the wolves to the plane crash. Everything they survived was so that he could die there, as opposed to the other places that they survived. You know, his reason for running when the wolves were chasing wasn't so that they can make it back to the mainland or go back home. His reason for running was so that he wouldn't die in that moment being torn apart by a wolf. His reason for survival was so that he could get to the very best point that he could to find the best place to die. And he was very happy with where he died. He had the view, he had everything, he was ready to go.
But I'm pretty sure, I don't know about you, I'm pretty sure like when they were like panning away from that, you could like ever so faintly like hear like wolves. I don't know about you.
No, I heard that too.
Ended up getting mauled anyways.
Yeah. But I think that was I thought that was a new take on this idea of survival. Because I think with Castaway and with a lot of this movie, we kind of get the idea that survival is we are fighting for our lives so that we can go back home. That there's, Chuck Nolan didn't Castaway. His whole fight is to be able to get off of that island. But in that moment in The Grey, it's kind of showing that the reason for fighting isn't necessarily always to go back home. It might just be that you want to get to a better place to die, and die in a place of your choosing, in a place of your own free will almost. And I thought that was a very beautiful moment in the film.
I liked some of the other cast members. Dallas Roberts was the guy that the second to last guy to die with Liam. I've seen him in a bunch of things, and I when I saw James Badge Dale in the beginning of the movie, I thought he was going to be in a lot more, but he was like the first one to die.
Yeah, it did have a good supporting cast, and I like how so how many did they start with? 7, I think 7, and then it kind of dwindled down. Yeah, so they have 7, and then I like that kind of approach where you start with the large and then it's kind of dwindling down as they go. You keep losing people. That scene movies. Yeah, that scene where they're doing the jump off of the ledge onto the trees.
That was scary.
That was intense. I love how they stage it where you do the jump and then you have that shot where it's focusing on one guy who's getting ready to jump. Or to do the climb across the rope. But in the background, you just see Liam Neeson just, like, scurry across with, like, no problems. And so the guy's like, okay, all right, I'm going to do this. And, like, Liam Neeson's just like, quick, shoop, and, like, goes right across. And then the other guy, he makes the mistake. He looks down. You never look down. Never look down. Never look down. So I'm curious to know what you think about this. So one thing we talked a lot about with Castaway was the idea that this was a modern person being thrown into a situation where they didn't really have those resources at their disposal, and that almost their reliance on modern technology almost became their downfall if that person didn't adapt. And so we saw that with Castaway. I'm curious, do you kind of get that same impression with The Grey, or does it kind of differ from that structure for survival movies?
I'd say it differed because, for the most part, I thought Liam Neeson was, prepared. He was the one making all the best decisions for the group. And, I mean, he was the reason they all survived as long as they did. Because I think, in the end, if they just stayed in that plane, they all would have got eaten to death. Especially if he wasn't even there to explain to them about, like, the wolves and all that stuff. They wouldn't have known any of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so Liam Neeson was prepared, but the others probably would have met their demise.
Oh, yeah, they would have been dead in like a day.
Yeah. But so that's kind of interesting that Liam Neeson is now we don't really get too much of a look into how he kind of knew all these things that he knew. I mean, we get a little bit of a semblance that he's sort of
killing wolves for like people or whatever,
protecting camps or something.
Yeah.
We don't get much of a sense as to how he knows everything that he knows in the film, but you kind of hope that yeah. I know that if I was in one of these situations where I was in a plane crash, I would hope that there's someone like a Liam Neeson there ready to go.
Hopefully. Yeah. And then there's always a guy who thinks he knows everything, but he really doesn't know.
That'd probably be me. I'd be like, all right, guys, we're going to do this. Yeah. and then everyone would die, and I'd be like, well, shit, I don't know what I'm doing.
Make sure you lick the yellow snow.
This is my own little survival story, I guess. So,
you ran out of Blu-rays?
Well, yes, but no, not this one. So this was going back to, I think, middle school, back when I was going to youth group. And we, as a youth group, we went on a retreat to this mountain. So we all hike up the mountain, and we get to the top, and I'm there with this other kid. And I'd been watching, I think it was on Cartoon Network. It was like Survive This. I don't know. Do you remember that show?
No, I didn't really watch much. I was more of a Nickelodeon kid.
So it was a show where they had like kids / teenagers like in groups being put into survival situations that they had to survive. And so we as the group get to the top of the mountain, me and this other kid, I had been watching the show, and I was like, and I knew that we were hiking up the mountain, and then we were going to hike down, and we're going to go like kayaking or something. And so we're all kind of hanging out at the top of the mountain, kind of resting before we hike down. And I say to this kid, you know what? We should get a head start on the hiking. We might as well, we could get all the way down to the bottom, and we could just be sitting there. We can wait, and then everyone will come down. And like, I don't know, in my head, like I was like, oh, this is genius. This is perfect. This is everyone's gonna think like, I'm this like really like capable person. And so we start hiking down. And I have no idea where we're going. I'm like, oh, well, the sun is angled this way, so that must be north. And I just start walking.
Oh God.
And we're going. And then I realize, like, I have no idea what we're doing. And then and then one of the youth group leaders come, like, charging down, and they find us. And it turns out that the plan that they never told us was that we would hike up the mountain and then hike down the exact same way and then drive to another location to the kayaks. I thought that we were hiking up the mountain and then hiking down the other side to the river that had the kayaks at the base of the mountain. And so we were hiking down the complete opposite side on different trails, on different tracks. So I feel like I resonate with the Liam Neeson character and with Chuck Noland, because I too have been in a situation where I've depended upon my life for surviving in the elements and wondered whether my dependency on modern technology would be my downfall.
Yeah, he had like a cell phone with him, a whole friggin' whole friggin' backpack full of snacks.
So yeah, that's my tale. One theme that I thought that the film had that I thought was really interesting, that they really do with Diaz's character, is this idea of embracing fear, because and that you need to kind of have this sort of healthy fear within you to be able to survive. Because you have that scene which I really like, where Diaz is kind of, they're all around the fire, and Diaz is kind of turning on everybody.
Yeah.
And then he and Liam Neeson wrestle a little bit. And uh, Diaz is saying, he's like I'm not afraid. I don't have fear in my heart or whatever. Yeah. And Liam Neeson's like, I'm terrified. And I think that was a really cool moment, because I think a lot of times we kind of associate power and authority with being fearless. And you would kind of think that, for someone like Liam Neeson, who's a very like, we have to do this, we have to get this, we have to go here, that, he doesn't have that. And for him to kind of be like, hey, I'm terrified, and you kind of have to have that fear in order to be able to survive. I thought that was a really interesting kind of additional element to the film.
And I think that's why Frank Grillo's character didn't like him, at least at first, because he was like, "Oh, this guy thinks he's tougher than everybody." He basically was envious about how like he was able to like lead the group and kind of work at a swift pace.
Yeah, like it almost like with Liam Neeson's character stepping up and taking charge, it made Diaz feel inferior, and so he was kind of acting out as a way to try to assert his dominance in a way.
Like that scene with the wallets, he was like, "Oh, wasting time with wallets. Wait,
get the wallets, everyone, get your wallets." That was funny. Made me laugh. But then I think that's why I think that fire was kind of the turning point for Diaz's character, to that they kind of have that nice moment when Diaz dies, because Diaz realizes more of who Liam Neeson's character actually is, and that I think when he kind of understands that idea of, I need to be afraid, or I should be afraid, or it's okay for me to be afraid, and that isn't a sign of weakness at all. I think that's kind of a turning point for his character, that he, because I think in general with people, I find when people try to shut out fear, they're often more afraid, because they're suppressing their fear, and that kind of amplifies the fear within them. But it's when people are kind of able to process their fear and they kind of come to grips with it, that they are actually more at peace. So I think that's why Diaz is so okay with dying at the end, because he's kind of processed his fear and he's just accepted it, and now he's kind of at peace. So going into final thoughts, Rob, what are your final thoughts on The Grey?
Very solid, entertaining movie. I mean, it could have just been, some throwaway kind of movie, but I think in the end it'll stick with you, and it's a movie you'd want to watch again. And I think it fits the survival movie category that we started really well. And I think I'd give it a 3.8 out of 5.
Nice. So my final thoughts on The Grey are that I really like this movie a lot. I think the performances are great. I think the tension is excellent. I think the direction is just fantastic. I love how visceral and real it feels. And each time while I'm watching this, I'm just on the edge of my seat. It just does a really great job with suspense and just throwing you right in the middle of this, and it feels real. And that's kind of heightened by a lot of the other kind of additional thematic things that they're doing. Because at its heart, it's sort of this just, straightforward survival movie, but then there's also more thematic elements kind of going on at the same time that sort of enrich it and make it more than just sort of a straightforward story. I'd go with a 4.4 out of 5 for me. Wow. I really like this movie a lot.
The high score.
The high score. So that has been our discussion of 2011's The Grey. Next week,
2012.
Well, it was made and came out in 2011, like premiered in 2011, and then it was released in theaters in 2012. It's a 2011 movie. The same way that you have Oscar movies premiere at festivals in the end of the year, and then they get their theatrical release in the January the next year. Those are movies of that year.
That makes sense.
That concludes our discussion of 2011's The Grey. Next week, continuing in our month of survival movies, we will be watching and discussing 2015's The Martian, directed by Ridley Scott. This is an interesting one because compared to the other ones that we're looking at this month, this is one that has more of a science fiction bend to it. Whereas Castaway and The Grey have been like real world, especially The Grey, real world, real stakes. The Martian is a science fiction film and looks at it in a different set of circumstances. So that's going to be an interesting one to discuss. Once again, I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár. Thank you so much for listening. And I'd like to thank Rob Giachinta for being here for this discussion. Rob, thanks for being here.
No problem.
Make sure to like, make sure to comment, make sure to subscribe to the Movie Night Tonight YouTube channel where you can look at all 3 seasons of Movie Night Tonight, as well as stay up to date on new episodes that drop every single week. You can also subscribe to us on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, and follow us on all of our social media at Movie Night TNT. So until next week, until our discussion of The Martian, thank you for listening.